But as we always do, or I should say usually do because we missed her last Tuesday, Jennifer Lawless down at American University, the director of the Women in Politics Institute there, likes to Skype in and keep us up to speed with what's going on inside the Beltway. So, Jennifer, thanks for Skyping in.
Hello, how are you?
We are good, as we were just talking about. Rain down there, rain up here. Not much we can do. In every life, a little rain must fall, but wanted to get your take, of course, on what's been taking place down in D.C. And one of the big things that's been talked about this week is assessing the president's first 100 days. Now, he would like to say that that's not an accurate barometer of where the administration has been so far, but is that, just historically been sort of the benchmark for a new president?
It is. So the first 100 days used to be known also as a honeymoon period because it would be during that time that both parties in Congress would grant the president a little leeway to enact his agenda. Now, the honeymoon period is gone. We saw with the two terms with Barack Obama that the out party is not willing to grant that leeway anymore, but it's still the time where, at least within his own party, the president tends to be able to curry the most favor. So for comparative purposes, analyzing the first 100 days of the Trump administration to previous administrations matters. And on that comparison, if we look at those indicators, Donald Trump gets an F.
Now, as you spoke about the now sort of long gone honeymoon period, but you said it's apples to apples to be able to compare it to Obama's first 100 days, as you said, by that lack of sort of the coziness amongst the parties. Now, did Trump just say today that he would give himself an A? How does he make that statement?
Well, I think we are well aware of the fact, and we've seen this now for a year and a half, that Donald Trump's assessments of himself are a lot different than empirical reality's assessments of Donald Trump. First of all, he's shying away from the 100 days being an important benchmark. He's saying that it's a silly, arbitrary cutoff. Of course, during the campaign trail, he made promises that were linked using that very same metric. In addition to that, I think he's assessing himself relative to how easy or hard he thought this job was going to be. In his interview with the Associated Press, for example, he mentioned that the job encompasses a lot more than he expected, and it's a lot tougher than he thought. And given those constraints, he thinks he's doing quite well. And so, I'm not surprised that Donald Trump is pleased with his performance. His base is also very happy with his performance, but the overwhelming majority of the American people are not.
Do you think his campaign and sort of how things have played out in the first 100 days, I don't know if we'll ever see a candidate quite like President Trump, but to make sort of big overarching promises of what could be accomplished in the first 100 days, maybe perhaps knowing very full well that it could not possibly be taken care of during that time frame, do voters care? Do they understand that when these promises are made, the reality is very different than what's on the campaign trail?
Well, I think the really diehard supporters don't care, right? They care more about the promise. They care more about the fact that he shares their agenda. And if he doesn't get it done in the first 100 days, but he gets it done on day 107 or day 497, it doesn't matter to them. For another group of voters, the 100 days doesn't matter, but getting it done during the first couple of years matters. If he can't do that, then the Republicans are going to take a probably pretty substantial hit in the midterms, and 2020 becomes tricky. As far as Democrats are concerned, they had no expectations for him. Their goal is to ensure that he doesn't get anything done in those first 100 days, so they're probably pretty satisfied with the outcome.
And you talk about things that may or may not happen in the first 100 days, maybe tack to the next issue here that I want to discuss with you, averting a government shutdown, talking about the funding for the wall. Talk to us a little bit about what we're hearing down in D.C. about this and how Trump might be backing away from that huge price tag in order to keep the wheels of government moving forward.
Well, as we talked about a few weeks ago, one way to fund Trump's tax plan, but also keep the government open, had to do with repealing the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, and that didn't work out, which means that there's now a shortfall of dollars. The amount of money attached to the wall makes it virtually impossible for the government to function and do anything other than build that wall. Now, a government shutdown unified Republican Party control would be completely unprecedented. And so what Donald Trump needs to decide is whether he wants to risk the shutdown where Republicans will take a hit. Perhaps he won't, because he will be able to say, look, I'm holding fast to my promises. I said this wall was important. I'm going to hold Congress's feet to the fire. But he risks then a Democratic majority in 2018 in the House of Representatives. So his incentive structure is a little bit different. If he caves and goes along with the Republican Congress to keep the government open, he's going to have to come up with a reason that he was unable to deliver on not only the most important promise of his campaign, but actually the reason he claims he ran for president in the first place.
And what are you hearing on that? Are there indications? I've seen reports that he's saying that, okay, well, let's look for the funding for the wall at another juncture. Is that feasible?
I mean, it's no, but this is one of those situations where commentators, pundits, pollsters, Democrats, even a lot of independent voters said all along and throughout the campaign trail that it was not feasible. And, Donald Trump's response at that point was, oh, don't worry about it. We'll get Mexico to pay for it. Well, we now see Mexico isn't paying for it, and it turns out that the American people don't want to pay for it either. So that's generally the sense down here. Like, is this going to be a game of chicken between President Trump and the Republicans in Congress, or is he going to cave before it gets to that point?
So as we always like to talk about keeping an eye on what's happening down there, again, there was a lot of buzz this week about the assessment of that 100 days. Now we're looking to see, again, averting a government shutdown. The tax reform and health care, are they still sort of the two looming issues?
They are, until we hear about them a lot, and we don't actually see much progress on either of them. I mean, every single day we get breaking news alerts that the House and the Senate might actually vote on another Obamacare repeal, but then you have members of Congress coming out and saying, well, I'm not ready to vote yet because I haven't actually seen the text. It's the same thing with tax reform. And so I think that what we're seeing is an administration that still hasn't fully figured it out how to get Republicans on board.
It looks like, can you hear me good? We're having a little feedback issue here. Am I coming in clear?
Now you are, you weren't.
Okay, I was having a little something pipe up on Skype here. Folks don't know I've got the computer in front of me. So I've got Jennifer in front of me and behind me here. So hopefully we'll go back over that again. So let's just reiterate, because we might have lost it a little bit in translation. As you talked about, not knowing when a bill is going to come forth for looking at changing Obamacare. Is this typical to come out to have kind of so much of a cloud of uncertainty, again, early on in this administration in an administration on the congressional side about how things are moving through Congress?
No, it's atypical, because traditionally the president has the party on his side and knows if he has enough votes and doesn't go public with a piece of legislation that he wants to pass unless he knows for sure that it's going to pass, or he knows for sure that it's going to be the other party obstructing passing something that the American people believe in. What we've seen with the Trump administration is more akin to how sausage is made, or in this case, how it's not made. Right, and there have been issue after issue, whether it be the executive orders, whether it be the repeal of Obamacare, whether it be preliminary plans regarding tax reform, where it's clear that Donald Trump doesn't have his own party on his side.
Now, this week's a little bit of an aberration from past weeks, that there was a lot of focus on international relations. Clearly, there still is, but not that sort of heightened level of activity that we've seen in recent weeks. But one of the things that we discussed prior to the show was this fact that the president is calling in the entire Senate to the White House to have a briefing on North Korea. What did you think when you heard that, again, that he wants the entire Senate to come to the White House?
Well, I think part of it has to do with the fact that when it comes to potential nuclear weapons, when it comes to sort of very grave dangers facing the country, he realizes that this can't be a partisan issue. And so this is a pretty easy way to extend an olive branch to the Democrats and make sure that everybody is dealing with the same kind of intelligence, everybody's aware of what's going on, so that if Donald Trump does want to move quickly, everybody is already sufficiently briefed. So it's not particularly surprising, especially given that he hasn't been very successful and he's been accused of not including the Democrats in anything for the first 100 days.
And then precedent for this. I mean, when's the last time we've seen a president call the entire body of the Senate and a national security issue to the White House? Have we?
So I have been thinking about that. I can't come up with anything off the top of my head. I mean, right after 9/11, we know that George W. Bush met with both houses of Congress, but it was in a more formal way, and it wasn't an invitation to the White House.
Now, you said you thought this might have been, again, overtures to be able to extend that information and inclusion to the Democrats. Any concerns about the severity and seriousness of the issue of North Korea by lieu of this action?
Well, I mean, we don't know, right? North Korea has told us numerous times that they have nuclear weapons capacity, that they're able to fire one off, and then every time that they say that they're going to, it flubs or it fails. South Korea obviously feels very threatened and they're concerned. And so I think it's a responsible thing to do and sort of get our ducks in a row. But, you know, it's hard to know whether this is just the latest example of Kim Jong-un not being able to deliver on what he promises.
Do you think we'll get any recon out of the meeting? Again, or is this so top secret? Not to say leaks per se, but, you know, we hear from the talking heads maybe on the shows this Sunday. Do you think the American public will get information following this meeting, or is it really that sort of insiders for him to brief the Senate on what they need to know, but maybe not necessarily what is should be available to the American public?
Well, I mean, when you're talking about briefing the entire Senate, I think that the level of discretion is probably already going to be different than if it was a top secret briefing. When you have 100 people in the room, it's different than when you have 7 or 8 people in the room. So my bet is that although there will be certain things that are disclosed at the meeting that the expectation is will not be shared more publicly, the assumption is that there will be leaks, and so people will be very careful about what it is that they say.
And you talk about the 100 being there at the meeting. Obviously, there'll be staffers on the administrative side from the White House. I'm assuming, would you think staffers would be allowed in such a meeting?
I have no idea. Again, like, I don't really know of a precedent to this type of meeting. And it's also not exactly clear what the briefing will entail or what kind of information is going to be relayed that the senators wouldn't ordinarily get if they were on the Armed Services or Foreign Policy committees.
Do you think they all trickle into the White House, or do you think they hop on a bus and just go down Pennsylvania? Like, how do they all get there?
I don't know. And can I just tag along and see if anyone knows?
Like, you know, they're all just kind of going down Pennsylvania, kind of linked arm in arm, or they're all driving their individual cars, showing their credentials to the press, like all ushering them in.
Maybe they'll use Segway.
That would be interesting to see sort of, again, how that transpires, because, as you mentioned, sort of precedent setting to have the entire body heading to the White House. Oh, another one of the topics, let's veer away from D.C. a little bit and go over to Berkeley, and I wanted to just discuss with you about canceling this Ann Coulter speech. And then I think we learned today that some conservative groups are trying to, you know, move the issue forward. Now Berkeley had canceled it amongst security threats. What's your take on this? You know, obviously each side is trying to play to their strengths, but the canceling of you know, the very conservative Ann Coulter at Berkeley. Any talk inside the Beltway about this at all?
Well, I think there are a couple of issues at hand, right? The first is the fact that this was not an explicitly partisan issue. It was groups of anarchists at Berkeley were the ones that made the threats, right? So this was not like college Democrats said, oh my gosh, we don't want her on campus. And the Supreme Court has said, and we're all well aware of the fact that, you know, the right to free speech and the right to assemble can be curtailed when there are security threats and there are problems. And so I don't find there to be much in the way of major drama here. Now, the fact that David Horowitz, a conservative writer, was also moved off campus a couple of weeks ago to a pretty remote location, I think allows the conservatives on Berkeley's campus to, you know, assemble lots of pieces to a case. But as far as the specific Ann Coulter one is concerned, I can't imagine that any college or university wouldn't react the same way when they get that kind of threat.
And let's talk holistically about this issue. If clearly it's not a left versus right, it's not coming from the college Democrats, but it's coming from, as you said, anarchists. It's just people looking to stir up trouble. It's just the sort of the new world order that it's not necessarily an ideological opposition to anyone, but simply just, again, folks looking to create trouble wherever they can.
Well, I mean, that might be part of it, but remember also that it's Berkeley. And so stuff like this happens every year at Berkeley. It's just, I think, a little bit more newsworthy now because we're seeing it manifest in other ways across the country. But again, I wouldn't read too much into this. My sense is that if we looked at sort of what happened with Berkeley speakers over the course of the last 50 years, every year we find something that suggests that someone was trying to stir the pot.
We keep thinking we're reinventing the wheel here, but the history tends to repeat itself. And one of the things we talked about before you came on, I was wondering when you were wrapping up school next week down at American University.
Indeed, I am. My last class is next Monday.
So you've got a big stretch of time ahead of you to commit to some research. What are you working on, Jennifer?
So the two projects that I'm working on this summer have to do, one has to do with the decline in local news and whether that's really having an impact on citizen engagement. And the other has to do with whether there's a Trump bump in terms of women's political ambition. So are Democratic women sufficiently fired up that they're actually going to run for office, or are they just becoming more active because Donald Trump is in the White House?
Clearly two engaging topics. Very interested in what you are finding with the decline of local news as we're here engaging in some local and national news here, and a Go Local downtown will be very interesting to see what your findings are there. Any plans to come up to Rhode Island?
I think in mid-June, actually. So I will keep you posted.
I appreciate it, Jennifer. Well, I know you've got plenty to do down inside the Beltway, lots to finish up the school year down there. So as always, we appreciate your Skype.